This is BBC Two.
We used to be a nice two-handed partnership. A couple of gentlemen in velvet jackets and shiny shoes producing caricatures for the press. But things have changed now. We're satisfying the needs of television in this factory.
Yes, the London Enterprise Board's answer to Gdansk. This is the first caricature sweatshop in the world.
Perhaps the last.
And it's full of very young people who have to sleep under the benches at night.
If they get any sleep at all.
Well, the very first thing is the photographic reference comes in, and then we go over there to the modelling. When the modelling's completed, it goes into the mould room where it's moulded.
There are master moulders over there.
Once the thing's moulded, it then goes into the foam room to be foamed. Once it's foamed, it comes back over here to the puppet makers who fit up the skulls inside. They also make the eyes over there by the machine shop, and they're then fitted in.
Then after that, it goes through to this room again to be painted, for the paintwork to be done. And then beyond that room is the wardrobe block, where they're fitted with bodies and costumes. And then the puppets come back over here to the wig-making section.
Once the thing's completely finished, you see that stack of boxes over there? They're put into boxes in alphabetical order, taken down in that very small lift that you saw, onto a lorry and driven to Birmingham, where the show's made in 3 days.
His name is Ronald Reagan, and he's quite a guy. You got to re-elect him, and they'll tell you why. He can really act. He's lowered income tax. He hates the Warsaw Pact.
Well, I think we're interested in the same thing as caricatures have always been interested in, which is as large an audience as possible. Which is why caricatures have so rarely painted, why they've always worked with engravings, etchings, lithographs, is to get it printed and in front of the audience. The audience we've got is television. Our television's very, very hungry for material because of the size of the audience. So what it means for us is that we have to have a workshop with a large staff. We've got about 17 people creating the puppets, the caricatures that go on the screen. Whereas I think in the past, most caricaturists have worked by themselves. Now, I think the best caricaturists are obsessive. The best ones work obsessively. And I think probably have a deeply distrustful nature. And maybe romantics or idealists or moralists or social reformers object to what's around them. But the ability to make people laugh at a funny face is a fascinating tool and a weapon.
Well, we both start off as illustrators, and that means exactly what it says. You have to illustrate someone else's piece, you illustrate a book, and you quickly find that with caricature you can actually make very simple statements, your statements. And you do get upset about things. You get upset about policies or certain people. And there is a certain amount of satisfaction being able to slag them off in public, in print.
I think this is the motivation of all caricaturists. I mean, certainly the caricaturists that are working today that we admire have this kind of edge. People like Scarfe and Stedman, and Steve Bell. And then going back, I mean, Lowe, Dantan, Dormier, going right the way back to Gilray, who was probably the first guy to decide this is what I'm going to do for a living.
The other
Others stole it, of course. Crookshank, Rowlandson and the rest of them. Pinched me ideas before the ink was dry. Imitation isn't the sincerest form of flattery, you know. Payment is. You ask my publisher, Mrs. Humphreys.
Well, I think out of British history, Gilray certainly leaps out. In a way, it was a little easier for him, I think, because the caricature that he produced, which went to quite a large audience at the time, would have been seen by a lot of people as the only portrait they ever saw of that particular person. I think someone like Gilray was definitely working in order to express his feelings about people in power or people in general. I don't think he was a person who liked humanity very much.
He wanted to be an engraver, and he tried for years, and the noses just kept getting bigger, and by the time he was about 35, he thought, well, to hell with it, you know, I'll be a caricaturist. And I think he was probably the first full-time professional caricaturist. It's very easy for us to do a caricature, because we've got photography. I mean, how did Gilray get the likenesses, the caricatures of the people he was guying?
Well, I think, because London was a much smaller town, I think one, by actually going to the House of Commons and sitting in the visitors' gallery and sketching, of which the poor MP would hide, or in some cases, the subject, the politician, wanted to be caricatured.
Like Heseltine?
Like Heseltine,
So what would he do?
Politician.
How would he get...
Well, in one case, Canning made an excuse for Gilray actually to visit his house and deliver a package, but at the same time to get a glimpse of him, George Canning. He was a very young, very ambitious politician, became Prime Minister eventually, and he was very eager to make his debut in the caricature shop windows, like the windows here. And these were one of the great features of London street life, that anybody, high or low, could walk down the street and look at the caricatures. They couldn't necessarily buy them. They were actually rather expensive. They were 2 and 6, 3 shillings each, which was perhaps a weekly wage, more than a weekly wage for some people.
So mainly for toffs?
Essentially, they were for the man in class. But then if you didn't want to buy the print, you could sometimes hire out, portfolios for the evening, put down a deposit of 5 shillings, got 2 and 6 back when you took the portfolio back.
Like a video?
Exactly like a video shop. You took the thing out for the evening, for an evening's entertainment.
I think probably Gilray was the only one that wanted to be the way what he was and stayed like that and went mad doing it. Jumped out of a second floor window, Mrs. Humphrey's print shop. But Hogarth, I think, wanted to be a fine artist. But his greatest stuff really was in the field of observation of social mores, and so was Daumier. I mean, his cartoons were real barbs and wonderfully drawn, but never taken seriously as art, except now. In retrospect, they looked on now as people would like to own one as a picture. They end up in, galleries, or they end up in Sotheby's, whatever, as a highly prized piece of work. When I looked at my own exhibition at the Festival Hall last year, I was quite stunned myself by the energy in it, which was still in it, even though the incident had passed, the political situation had gone long ago. And yet the energy was still in the drawing. There was obviously an intensity, a sense of cause about it that made me put that energy in. I meant it. It wasn't, gosh, how much am I going to get for this? It was, I meant the drawing, And it's fine up to a point. It's marvellous, that thing of energy, but there are other kinds of drawing again, and it intrigues me to know what you do when you reflect a little more and don't, and slow down in it. Now, maybe that's mellowing, I don't know, And maybe it's wanting to be taken seriously, which is terrible, really, because as a cartoonist wants to be taken seriously, you see. But I'm not a funny person. I'm really a pompous artist, you see. That's what I want to be, that's what I'm trying to be, is a pompous artist, you see. Wants to do big, ponderous works of art. For galleries, you see, for people who wander around half dead, looking at it. That's what I'm looking for, that's what I want to be. Why? Can't I imagine?
The artist is somebody called John Hamilton Mortimer, who was not a professional caricaturist. He painted portraits, history subjects, and did a few caricatures. It's about 1765, so it's very early. And it's an oyster party, so there's a whole group of friends, probably a club. And in a way, I mean, the whole principle of caricature as practiced, say, by Wally Fawkes today, is really laid out here. There's practically nothing in terms of the art of caricature that you can actually add to some of these faces. Interesting thing about this is that the early history of caricature in England was what one could call a caricature by consent. In other words, the people here wanted to be caricatured. They wanted to be in this
It's possible that they almost commissioned it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It does look extraordinarily modern. I mean, it could almost be Wheelers today, couldn't it?
It's even at Wheelers, isn't it?
Who are these people? There'd be Mr. Thatcher in drag, Francis Bacon. Who's that?
It's an Irishman.
The actor.
Yes.
Milo O'Shea.
That's right, Milo O'Shea. And that's got to be Nigel Dempster, isn't it?
Yes, rushing to the presses with his ear all quite big. That could be
Ian Botham over here.
Jeremy Thorpe and Norman Scott there.
That's right.
But caricature is really associated with the all-male gathering, where politeness and pretense and finesse are all dropped. You know, you're simply unself-conscious.
Night out with the boys.
Night out with the boys, yes, and mutually, you know, making fun of each other, really.
Would you like to order, sir?
Yes, I will have a steak.
How'd you like it?
Raw, please.
And what about the vegetables?
Oh, they'll have the same as me.
That'll be absolutely Thank you.
Well, in the past, you had a gradual progression of how things were printed and improvements on print. Now you've got all that. You've got television, you've got film, you've got a variety of photographic things. You really are, as a caricaturist, you've really got yourself a problem. And I think that the best caricaturists working today have evolved styles that could compete with this incessant barrage of images.
Someone like Scarf is very, very, very talented, very expert at just pulling and pulling and pulling the face without losing the likeness.
My particular delight is to push the features as far as they'll go, without letting them disintegrate. There comes a point, you know, as I always say, like a piece of chewing gum, you can stretch it thus far and thus far, but there comes a point where it snaps and it no longer, I mean, that sometimes happens and it is no longer recognizable. But I am trying all the time to push the character as far as it will go. I think it gives the drawing tension, it gives the drawing interest, it gives the drawing a kind of unusual quality, rather than a straightforward copy of a photograph. A lot of caricatures are just slight elongations of a photographic drawing. They're never interpreted as anything else. I mean, I've drawn Mrs. Thatcher's scissors and scythes and hammers and trains and refrigerators, and I put her personality into something else. That's a different type of caricature, which I love doing. Or into animals, even. If you can make them work as animals, that's wonderful. I think all artists have this feeling that they want to make their figures come alive. I've tried various ways, you know, animated films and three-dimensional figures. And it's also a challenge to get the drawing, the piece, the sculpture right from all angles. When you're making a drawing, you present it from one angle, just from one angle, and that's, in a way, an easy achievement. Or it's a different type of achievement to get one single image that sticks in the mind. To get a statue of Margaret Thatcher right from all the way around is more of a task, more of a... And more interesting, too, because I find the back of people very interesting, as well as the front.
That's right, actually, sort of make him look like his mum.
Got his eyes close together.
Eyes very close together. Well, I think it's a very obvious thing to do, actually, because after all, the people who've been caricatured are in 3D. Danton was working in 1830 in Paris doing three-dimensional caricatures.
I think you understand that, Pete.
There isn't. Danton obviously was without photographic reference. The magic thing about all the caricatures he did was that they were based on looking at people, remembering the likeness, and then caricaturing it away from them.
Oh, he's a bit of a society dandy. I mean, he'd spend half his time at bathing with the toffs. We don't get to see the people we do. We do it from photographs.
Well, personally, I wouldn't want to.
No. So how long has the museum had these downtown submarines?
Downtown submarines went to the museum in 1888. Here the place.
Oh, yeah. Oh, amazing.
I have here Nablash was a famous singer of the time, singing mostly in Paris, but in London too. In one of his most famous roles, which is Figaro.
Curious thing, you know, Peter, that the thin people were 5 francs to 8 francs, and really fat people...
This must have cost about 10 or 15.
10, 15, that's right. Think what you could get for Cyril Smith, right?
Well, you've got to charge for the materials, haven't you?
The bodies are beautifully done, aren't they?
Well, it's a caricature that isn't just the face, I mean, it's the whole body. I mean, all this is portraiture as well, isn't it?
Downtown had a collection of erotica, which his wife systematically destroyed. What I can't understand is why she destroyed every single mould of the caricatures.
I suppose to try and increase the value of the ones that were left.
Let's have a look at that Englishman there, the Lord Chancellor.
That one.
Oh, that one, I don't know its name.
One thing you notice is that the English ones go much further than the stuff he does on the French. The French stuff is much kinder. One of the critics said, why doesn't he stick it to the French politicians like he does the British ones? I think he felt much freer to have a go at them.
His Samuel Rothschild was very cruel.
This looks really,
On this.
This is a bit sort of...
there's a lot of anti-Semitism coming out there, isn't there?
There's money all up to here.
Yes.
Money.
Gold.
Look at the warts inside the
Yes.
lips.
Or is that money? More money, isn't it?
Eating
That's
money.
a pretty violent caricature, isn't it?
Oh, maybe slightly anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Very much so.
Well, slightly, it's not the word. And here, English politicians.
This is the House of Commons. She's letting
Yeah,
himself
it's
go
the
again,
back-
hasn't he?
The back bench.
The old sleeping cliche, right?
That's it.
Not very kind.
But it's still true.
Politicians, now there's the best target. I sit in the House of Commons and watch them lampoon themselves. There's little for me to add at all. Don't trust any of them. When you're on their side, it's satire. When you're against them, it's defamation.
Norman Tebbit, born Castle Grantham, Transylvania, 1926. Although it is widely believed that Norman Tebbit began his career as an airline pilot, his story is now acknowledged to be an erroneous interpretation of the real facts, which are that Norman Tebbit is able to transmute into a bat at will. He joined the Conservative Party, dedicated to the single aim of denationalizing the blood banks. His interests include meeting young people and flower arranging.
You start off, I suppose, just by looking at the people, by memorising the photographs, or getting as many references as you can, and just working at it. I mean, and obviously your image of the person changes through time because you get to know them and the sort of personalities they are. So, like, case in point is Tebbit, where, I mean, Tebbit appeared out of the blue pretty well when I was doing, this was about 1981. And he was suddenly appointed to the employment secretary, and I think Pryor got the boot, or got shunted over to Northern Ireland, and Tebbit came in. And nobody quite knew what he was like. Everybody knew he was a bit of a thug, but I didn't know what he looked like. And so you're sort of casting about a bit. But eventually, of course, Tebbit's a very strong looking character. He's very distinctive. He looks like a sort of, well, criminal, to put it mildly. But you eventually break it down into a simple sequence of shapes. So Tebbit's got the 3 strands of hair. He's got these hollow eyes.
And yet all the time I'm using like comic conventions. I mean, the glowing eyeball is a sort of, oh, I've seen it used in lots of places. But it's a very useful. He's got the sort of slightly cruel mouth. No, he is. Hair and eyes are the first things I got with Heseltine, because he has this reputation of being a sort of whiz kid at conferences, and so you get this mop of hair and staring eyes. But slightly other aspects of his face come into play. Actually, I think they do change a lot through time, the characters. And another thing I sort of subsequently noticed about Heseltine was his forehead. So he's got this prehensile forehead. I don't know if prehensile is the right word, but it's basically like that. And I mean, you pick up these things by just looking at the character, looking at photographs of the character. I mean, and also, of course, you're looking at other caricatures all the time. I mean, I hope I'm not directly copying, but you see how people are coping with the same problem. And some people are more exemplary than others. So, like, somebody like Trog is always very good. He's very accurate for likenesses.
There's a lot of hair, isn't there? Though I think the boss has made them all have haircuts recently. He's much shorner than he was, and so's Nigel Lawson, which is a great shame. His hair used to be like a black Atlantic Ocean all roaring about, but then he's had to have it all cut off. Great pity. I shouldn't listen to her. No, they're very... very pale, fair eyebrows, deep set eyes. And a sort of fairly blunted end to the nose, as if he's been pressing it up against rich, wealthy people's windows as a youngster. It's a fiercely weak face. I mean, the chin. When you can see the person starting to look back at you, you know, it's a sort of... you're not just... it's just not the outside of the person. You sometimes get something of their inside. You know, perhaps it's a look in the eye. It's an expression. That's what you're looking for, and it sometimes takes a long time to get that. But when they start looking back at you, I think that's when you know that you're all right.
Always before I've been aware of the person, and I've watched them on television, I read about them in the newspaper, and you can find their character a little bit from things like that. You also read bits of news about them, which adds symbolic things to their character. But for the actual drawing itself, I have a vague idea what I'm going to do first and what it's going to look like, although it quite often ends up entirely different at the end. And I think if I actually start with someone like Heseltine here, I've got photographs around, and ideally I should also have sketches that I've made at party conferences, because there you can see the whole figure of the man, and not just these head shots like this, which are very, very misleading in many ways, but they serve to remind one what a person looks like. So I will probably just begin really with the something around the eye area, because the eye is terribly important. And Heseltine's got these very, well, I think deep-set eyes, almost a skeletal face. So I would begin by putting the eye sockets in, and then the cheekbone underneath, in his particular case. And then I might come down to the jaw, like that, and put in the nose next. One's got to almost, like an impressionist, feel the character. Ideally, you should hear the character talking. You should hear Heath's plummy voice or Margaret's strident voice as you're drawing the thing. In the case of Michael Heseltine, I once worked for a magazine called Town magazine. He was the editor. And when I wanted my drawings, my original drawings back at the end, one of MacLeod and one of Enoch Powell, he said no, he wouldn't let me have them. And I've mentioned it to him at party conferences occasionally. I would like my drawings back. And he says, no, they're mine. And I say, well, actually, I did them, and I don't want you to have them. And he said, I'm very sorry, they're mine. So when it comes to drawing someone like him, I've got to be careful that my dislike of him on that basis doesn't come in. I might dislike him for the job he's doing in politics. That's all fair game. But I shouldn't really dislike him as a person outside that, because they are symbolic, all these people, of the job they do. I'm not really attacking them for their own private lives. So, having said that, I'll put this very mean little mouse on Michael Heseltine.
I'm a traditional musician as well as being a traditional cartoonist. And Jerry Scarf is much more of a, he'd be a modern musician if he played, you know, he'd really take it out and try and explode the tune, and so that, you know, it wouldn't be his idea to make a comfortable little paraphrase of it, like mine is. I'm very lucky. I've got a fairly wide range, from dead straight to fairly sort of extended cartoon, caricature. I mean, there's the portrait caricature, which I use that for Punch, and a lot of the old Punch covers had that. You know, you had to look twice to see that it wasn't just a straight academic portrait. But, I mean, they weren't all that straight. I mean, if you compared it with the photograph or the real, you know, you could see that there was a gentle distortion going on, but I think if it keeps it, there's a sort of harmony. I know it's getting back to the music again, but the caricature's got to have its own harmony and rhythmic thing that flows through it. And when that starts breaking down, you know that there's something wrong. You know, the tension's released and it's lost something. So you've got to keep feeling that you've got to keep pushing it back into place. To see the face actually working and moving about and reacting and lying, you know, you've got to get to know what happens to them from just a still photograph, you know, to a total stranger that you've not seen. It's very difficult, but it takes a long time to break in a new politician too. Even Harold Wilson took most of this, quite a while, to realise it just wasn't a circular blob and a pipe.
I remember Jimmy Carter being made president, and we were asked to do a model of him, a caricature of him, and we had enormous trouble because all we had was a set of photographs. We didn't know about the man. Nobody else seemed to know about him. Nobody else had caricatured him.
He was even captioned John Carter.
This is John Carter. And we did our best, and it worked out quite well, but it was difficult. I mean, what happened with Carter was his face that goes around the world. He's caricatured here, he's caricatured there, he's caricatured everywhere. And suddenly, yes, on a worldwide thing, it becomes...
Yeah. I mean, when Kinnock came into power, you see all these very shaky-looking Kinnocks, you know, including ours.
Yeah.
You know, what should we do? Is it the nose? Is it that top lip? Is it the fact he's bald? And then gradually, as you look over each other's shoulders...
It turned out to be the top lip, didn't it?
It turned out to be the top lip. People must look at each other's. I mean, we do. Because you're relying also on what's in people's heads, your audience heads, of what they think it looks like. You know,
anyway, you always look at other people's caricatures when the deadline approaches.
To me, everyone starts off being normal, and then I build over it. I'm not affected by features. I'm affected by expression. Features to me are part of this terrible world we live in, vanity. Features are vanity. Expression is what you do in life. humour is what saves us all. And to me, I mean, my work should be humorous, but it could be destructive of that person's pompousness, which is not humour. It is a necessary item in human relations to destroy pompousness, to destroy self-importance. What makes a good caricature is a good sense of satire, which is what it's all about. Forgiveness in people's faults if they don't destroy other people. This is the whole thing. Destroying them, needn't be physically, can be in any other way. There are other ways of destroying people. And I feel that a caricature should have a function, not merely to aggrandize that person, but to tell the future generations what that person was really like in private, socially, in his work, what good he's done by all this enormous publicity that he's had during his lifetime. I feel it was necessary for people like me to go around telling the truth.
George Grosz said that the times when you get really great caricature is in times of great decadence. And I think he meant by that during the times when when the whole structure of a society was just falling apart, and therefore you looked out the window and you just reacted with complete disappointment and shock. I mean, that's certainly true of the period that Grosz lived through.
By the time he went to art school, George Grosz wanted to be a satirist. That's what he set out to do. And the German war machine of 1914-18 war, he began to he loathed the military and the propaganda so much he began to loathe the German people.
They actually sentenced him to death with desertion.
Well, he would really, wouldn't he?
Obviously.
By about 1920, he developed a really acid style. He welded together a style and content that really was remarkably, well, it was unique. It was also anti-artistic. What he wanted to do was to really get a sharp vision across that had nothing to do with art. He looked at kids' drawings because they have a very single-minded approach to it. Lavatory drawings, lavatory wall drawings, and things like that to develop his style.
And it looked as if it was done with a rusty scalpel.
They were, in fact, a mirror image of Germany as it was about to become. You can look at those bloody drawings, and you can see Hitler's Germany before you in 1920.
George Grosz didn't actually draw the Nazis when they came into power, because he felt he'd done that already. He'd prophesied it. There were other artists working at the same time with similar concerns. There was Otto Dix, whose work really differed from Grosz's in the sense that he was interested in his work being on exhibition, being in a gallery. He used to do prints, but they were limited editions of prints, again for a gallery, whereas Grosz's work, when he worked for print, was intended for a large audience, and of course to be reproduced by the thousand. A lot of his early work was concerned with the First World War, with the trenches, with the whole horror of that. He did spend all of the First World War in the army. He had a miserable life, actually, because when he did get out of the army and finally got himself a teaching job, that was at the time when the Nazis were coming in. He was sacked. In 1939, he was arrested and sent to a concentration camp for a couple of years. I don't know what he did for the rest of the war, but at the end of the war, in about 1945, they put him into the Dad's army, into the Home Guard, and the French arrested him and put him in prison for a year. But I think his work, I think he was interested in working in a broader way than gross. There are a lot of very terrific portraits. There's one in particular called The Journalist, which is a sort of picture in black red, which is very powerful. So people like Dix and Gross, who were obviously left-wing and not agreeing with a severely right-wing government, it's obvious, really, I think, that that government wouldn't want them to have a say in public, or even to have it at all. Whereas Churchill's government during the war against the Nazis was fine by Lowe, because as a socialist, the war was about fighting fascism, so that fitted in very nicely.
David Lowe, the greatest. In cartooning, I followed his work in the Sydney Bulletin before he ever thought of coming here. He was born in New Zealand, but he was a great, great cartoonist. Sydney Bulletin, enormous paper, weekly, and he occupied an entire page every week, and it was terrific. I doted on it. And when he came to England, I managed to contact him, and we became friends in caricature, not socially otherwise, but great friends in caricature. I followed him intensively because he was so great in this last war, to show up Hitler for what he was.
Lowe in his memoirs actually says how Halifax had been to Germany in 1937, had met with Hitler, Goebbels and others, who had complained bitterly about cartoons in the English press, particularly Lowe. And when Halifax came back, he asked to see David Lowe. They had a meeting. And he actually said, look, in the interests of peace, will you tone these down a bit? Will you stop it, you know? Lowe didn't stop it, but he did tone it down a little bit. This was drawn, in fact, 2 months before Chamberlain flew to Munich to make the agreement with Hitler. And it's called Which Backbone Shall I Lay Out This Morning, My Lord?
Did he manage to get the stuff that he wanted to publish?
In almost every case he did. It's important to remember with Lowe is that he wasn't in fact English. He was a New Zealander who first really made his living in Australia, then came to England. In other words, he was an outsider. And the editor of the paper was Lord Beaverbrook, who was a Canadian. They were both outsiders, outside the English establishment. And the Standard was a Tory paper, Beaverbrook was a Tory, but Lowe was a socialist. And yet Beaverbrook still employed him. And in fact, Churchill, in fact, once complained about a Lowe cartoon. And Beaverbrook simply said, I don't interfere with Lowe, never have done, never will do.
Sir David Lowe? Don't tell me the fella got a knighthood for doing this. I was arrested once and they even took my pension away. He worked for a Tory newspaper, I see. Me too, though it didn't do me much good.
We were too young to do caricatures in the Second World War. The only war we've been around for, only local war we've been around for, was the Falklands. And we certainly didn't thrive. In fact, we were in the throes of producing a caricature book, and the Falkland War was declared. And we got this letter back from a publisher who shall remain nameless, but is known as Colin Webb. And it says, my enthusiasm has recently been dampened by the fact that anything remotely satirical in the present circumstances seems to be badly mistimed. Both Private Eye and remarkably Punch have, in my view, exceeded the parameters of bad taste in their coverage of recent political events. I'm sure that once the Falklands issue has been resolved, then we can once again poke fun at our leaders, and doubtless I will be feeling that much more creatively dynamic.
So by not publishing and doing the book, we helped Thatcher win the war, right?
I can't think of any time when I've been censored. But if you're a right-wing cartoonist and you work in a left-wing journal, there must be some psychological pressure, even if it's from your fellow journalists down at the pub. And if you lean towards the left, as I think I do, and I appear in a newspaper that leans towards right, there must be some sort of pressure. But I must say that no one has ever said it to me in so many words. But I know quite often my work appears amongst articles that say something entirely different. However, I think that's very, very healthy. I want to promote that, really, because I think that any newspaper is big enough to accommodate a cartoonist. And a cartoonist is like a licensed jester. He can say what's wrong with the king. He can make any comments he wants to.
In fact, these are interesting. They're both royal subjects. That's George IV there as Prince of Wales, and there...
Prince of Wales is a drunk, surely.
He is, in fact, completely intoxicated. It shows the Prince of Wales in a brothel with Charles James Fox, who was the leader of the Whig opposition. He's the one vomiting all over the carpet.
He's the one staring at the upholstery.
He's the one, yes, upstairs. And these are prostitutes on the board. A large part of this collection, of this exhibition, is what was formerly the Royal Collection of about 12,000 prints, all bought by George IV when he was Prince of Wales and in his later career.
So royalty was a good little earner in those days?
Oh yes, I think it was. Royalty, I think one enjoyed the caricatures and bought them at a great deal. And of course, as for you, furnishes a wonderful and continuing subject.
What's happening in this one here?
Well, these are in fact both suppressed prints. They're ones almost certainly which the prince paid money to the caricaturist actually to really buy up the copyright of the prints. So again, this was a very good earner for the caricaturist. It was essentially blackmail. If he did something sufficiently outrageous, he would probably get a sum from the prince, to buy it out. And you can see it does say suppressed.
Could you, in fact, have an idea and not actually do the work and get paid?
Yes. This was a dream. You merely had to...
How did it work? I mean, what did you do to get your money?
Well, in a number of cases, the caricaturists wrote letters to the prince's agent and said they were considering publishing a print this day called something like the Royal Coxcomb or the Royal Cuckold or whatever. And immediately there'd be a reply from the prince's agent saying, don't do it, here's 50 quid to begin with. But the most notable figure actually to be bribed was George Cruikshank, who received £100 in consideration of a pledge not to show His Majesty in any immoral situation.
I did Queen Charlotte once as sin at the gates of hell with foul serpents crawling out of her nether regions. Which seemed to upset everyone for some reason. Can't imagine why. Their son is even worse. Now there's a really randy prince. Mrs. Fitzherbert, Lady Jersey, you name him, he's had his way with them. The only person who he leaves alone's his wife.
I think when Gilray was working, that the aristocracy and royalty was pretty rotten.
Turn of the century, France before the First World War, the whole fabric of society, they knew it was coming.
Well, there were lots of crasses in French history, and each one of them seemed to produce good caricature. The different thing about France is that they used to impose total censorship on caricature in certain periods. So Dormier's works are the seesaws between political cartoons and caricatures and social cartoons. You do the social ones when it looks as if you could get thrown in prison for doing the political ones. Dormier did spend a few months in jail for a particular cartoon. Well, I think the government that he had most trouble with was so corrupt that it was deeply fearful of caricatures and satire. And we did a lot of drawings of the king as a pair with Claude Philippon. And it got to such a stage where they reduced this man so much to this sort of pear shape. I believe that once a drawing of a pear was exhibited and taken off. It didn't even have a face on it.
So is this Gilray hating the French?
Yes, this is one aspect of it. It's actually not showing much respect for the English either. It should be pointed out. It didn't spare his own nationality. This is a very celebrated print called French Liberty, British Slavery. And I think it's almost the culmination, the crystallization of Gilray's version of the typical Frenchman, the typical frog, and the typical Englishman. So it's an ironic thing. French liberty, he's like a rat, really, half starving, eating roots and snails, which are crawling out of this pot, but full of passion for his revolutionary freedom. And on the other side is the so-called typical Englishman, fat, pimpled, complaining bitterly about over-taxation, and yet eating an entire side of beef.
High cholesterol diet.
Very high, thanks, with a frothing pint of beer behind him.
Do you think Gilray was an out-and-out racist or not?
Oh yes, I mean, complete one. I think he hated absolutely everybody. It was disgusting. So, you know, the answer is yes. I think he was, but he wasn't biased against any particular type. And the French maybe have the edge as his great target.
Racial stereotypes are very difficult to avoid because, I mean, if what you're doing is caricaturing an African or someone who's basically Jewish, sooner or somewhere along the line you're going to be using the nose or the lips that's associated in a stereotype way with that sort of thinking. But all you can really do is just keep your mind on it. Keep your mind on the person that it is. Keep it personal. And certainly not consciously use those ingredients which traditionally are associated with racism.
I'm not usually aware of the colour or the race, and I make a drawing of that particular character, whether it's Idi Amin or Tina Turner or whoever. I'm concerned primarily with their features. And I find this very difficult to answer because I don't think I think about this at all. I think I just make a drawing of anybody, whatever race, to try and bring their character across, or what they're doing wrong in the world, or right in the world, or whatever. I don't think I think of them as black, Jewish, Catholic, whatever. I don't think it comes into my mind to affect the drawing anyway.
In the 60s, I used to draw the black man with just a perfect circle and two round perfect circles with a dot in the middle and nothing else, just a black face, right? Just a black thing like that. And I did this series of black cartoons where they always appeared like that because it's a kind of irony, because I kept hearing people say they all look the same to me, you see. And it was a way of being, if you like, satirical about such a comment and such an attitude, which was prevalent then. I don't know, I think it still is in many ways. It's very difficult to find the differences in other ethnic groups when you're trying to caricature them. One isn't necessarily familiar with the faces and the differences.
What is the difference between reality and fiction? Lots of strange things happen in fiction. Lots of strange things happen in reality. What's so surprising? What's so surprising about a little bit of manufacturing here and there? Before Gordon Rees came along, I was always so patronizing. Before he joined my organization, I understand that he was a television producer. And of course, with his media background, he was an enormous help to the running of the department. He wanted me to speak differently. Do you notice how low I'm speaking? Well, years ago, I used to speak right up here. But he didn't like it because it didn't work on television. And therefore, he taught me to speak much lower. And that's particularly important when talking about the unemployed. You know the sort of thing? Of course my government cares for the unemployed. Most of us in the Conservative Party do. Perhaps in the future, we may be unemployed as well. That soft, gentle approach.
Wake up, you blithering idiots! You've made another balls up in Europe.
Jeffrey's made a balls up. Jeffrey's made a balls up. Jeffrey's made a balls up.
And so say all of us.
But you have to do is model, as it were, in neutral. So you have a likeness that people recognise, but there's hardly any expression because that's left for the puppeteer to work either side of the expression that you put on the face.
Yeah, it's a more complete thing than making models for stills because, as I said, it gains by the puppeteer's performance, by narrative, by movement, scripts, like music.
I think the cartoonist gets the image. I think it's my job not to distract in any way. Enhance if I possibly can. It doesn't always work. Hair's not necessarily the main feature of all cartoons. But if we take Margaret Thatcher as a very good image, I would have thought the first thing we could have done there was to supply a 3/4 wig. Mainly because of her original hair doesn't really have the substance or the body to sort of maintain its style. I'm not saying that she has, but I'm pretty sure over the years the image has strengthened and solidified to the point now where I wouldn't mind betting that she actually wears a 3/4 wig in behind the hairline. I know it is Queen Mary and people such as Queen Mary and some of the royals have worn them in the past. It's very useful for travelling. It just means they have to fit the piece on the back, which is always permanently set, and the front hair is then combed over that piece. We either refer to it as a 7/8 wig or a 3/4 wig, depending on how far back it goes. But I've got a feeling with Mrs. Thatcher that if I was going to improve her image, that's exactly what I would have suggested, that she actually does go in for a 3/4 wig and has a permanent hairdo and almost a guaranteed image.
I have to keep checking every now and again because the hairstyle varies, certain cosmetic features, and the clothes. You know, it's worth keeping an eye on what she's wearing because that's changed enormously. I mean, if you could see the first. I mean, do you remember when she first appeared? I mean, Minister of Education. I mean, it was all hats, wasn't it? Like Derby Day, like Ascot hats. And that was years before Saatchi's came in. They've removed her baby teeth and given her these massive, great choppers that I find very alarming. I mean, it's a lot of expensive dentistry's gone into that. I think it was a mistake.
As far as makeup is concerned, as I said, my general image, my general appearance is friendly but stern. Now, the stern bit is the red lipstick. Strong, determined. The rest of the makeup, I think, is the friendly side. The eyes particularly, the soft blue eyeshadow. Just a touch of black eyeliner and high cheekbones. I've always had a very good complexion, very high cheekbones.
I think all art, really, I was a commercial artist when I started. All art really should be about telling the truth, and commercial art isn't telling the truth. It's telling lies about the product in general to make it seem better than it is, more desirable than it is, whereas I feel that art should represent your view of the world, one's view of the world. And I said, this is my effort to put down what I see as the truth, because it is the most direct way to make comments about people who are controlling our lives, people who've set themselves up to say, this is the way you should live, this is what you should do, this is how you should, this is the direction you should go in. I just want to point out that they might be wrong.
People don't change very much.
No. People's behaviour stays the same, so therefore you get themes coming back all the time. Well, I mean, Scarf, Stedman, ourselves, I mean, everybody you've interviewed in this programme have reworked stuff that Gilray did. But caricature is basically a negative art. He's saying no, no, no.
Look, please, just give me a chance. Just give me a chance. I'm telling you, we were perfectly within our rights. Order! Perfectly within our rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once and for all. Here's the Falklands, here's the Belgrano, and here's the total exclusion zone. Order!